to another edition of Off the Beaten Path, Travel with Susan with Expedia Cruises here in Red Deer. When we think of Mexico, the first thing that comes to your mind is white sandy beaches, laying there with a margarita or one or two in each hand, relaxing. Well, did you know that there's more to do in Mexico than that? And before this all took place, about a couple of years ago, our very own Jordana Sims from our office had the experience of doing a Mexico foodie tour. So thanks, Jordana, for joining us and letting us know all about this adventure that you went on.
Yeah, thanks. I'm super excited to share this because food is kind of a big deal. I love food, and I think it really can make or break your travel experience. So this tour was once in a lifetime, definitely off the beaten path, dive into Mexico. So I will just share a little bit about and some pictures of where we went, and will definitely see that it is not your usual white sandy beaches, although we did get a bit of those.
Good. Yeah, exciting, right? We just don't think of Mexico much beyond that, right?
Well, that's just it. And it's one of those things that we dive into a little bit more when you're going somewhere further from home. But a lot of times Mexico is just that retreat for a lot of us. So we don't think outside the box. But it's definitely a really vibrant country full of lots of hidden gems. And we only scratched the surface on this tour. So
well, let's get started. I'm excited to hear all about it.
Awesome. So yeah, I started our trip in Mexico City, which again is awesome because we have direct flights right out of Calgary to Mexico City. So it was just a quick, I think it was about a 4.5 hour flight. And then you really dive right into the heart of Mexico. Then from Mexico City, we traveled down through Puebla, then Oaxaca, and finished down on the beach in Huatulco, which is probably the most common place on this tour that anybody might have heard of. So when you kind of land in Mexico City, you land in this concrete jungle. It is just a swarm of people. The population's about 21 million people. And, it's just noisy and busy, and you're kind of overwhelmed. It kind of attacks your senses. But all in this tour, I love that we stayed in the heart of every city in the Zocalo area, which is like the commercial center. And this picture here was actually taken from the rooftop restaurant at the hotel that we stayed at. So you're right in the heart of things. This square, when we were there, you can see it's kind of bordered by the big cathedral, and then there's the National Palace and all their legislature buildings right around there. And then right behind that is the Templo Mayor, which is an active archaeological site, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And this is literally right downtown, right behind the cathedral in that Zocalo area. So you've got all this history combined with all the new modern architecture and everything, and they all sort of built it on top of one another. So this site is, it was built back way 10,000 years in the past, I think it was. And then from there, you can see the layers of history, because after this temple was built, then the Spanish came in and invaded Mexico, and they built the cathedral right on top of these ritual sites and historical sites. So now there's all these layers upon layers of history through the streets of Mexico City that are really cool to uncover. And speaking of the Spanish invasion, these are the types of churches that you can see here. So this one is the Mexico City Metropolitan Cathedral. And as Mexico is a predominantly Catholic country, there's no shortage of churches to see. So I tried to limit some of the pictures, but this one was just absolutely incredible. It was built in stages over the course of over 300 years. And it is massive. There's 16 chapels, 14 of which are still open to the public right now, and 2 are just for priests and nuns. And it's got 2 of the largest pipe organs in the Americas, so all across North and South America. And you can see the one over on the left-hand side. Like, it's just absolutely stunning, and there's just it just draws the eye. Like, you can't even describe how big these temples are. So we did go to a number of churches. Like I said, we're not going to dive into all of them, but we're here to talk about the food. Here's the beginning of the food. So for somebody who is gluten intolerant, this 𝘽𝙖𝙩𝙗 it was heartbreaking to be in there because it is all carbs all the time. This bakery is 3 stories. So you go in there and you can see in the one picture, all these people just have trays. So you come into the bakery and they give you this big serving platter basically, and you just go and load up on whatever baked goods that you want. The cakes you can see on the right hand side these are just some of the small cakes. There was an entire floor on the 3rd story that was all their like wedding cakes and quinceañera cakes and first communion cakes, and these things are like 4, 5, 6 tiers tall. And so bakery and baked goods wasn't predominant in Mexico until the British came over. They didn't have ovens or anything like that. So it was one of these things that the Mexican natives were asked or forced to work in the wheat fields when the settlers came over from Europe, and they were paid in bread and baked bread. So that's how bread became introduced to the Mexican culture. And now it is everywhere. Every city that we visited has their own signature bread, and you can't go anywhere without having carbs. So again, like I said, the smell, you could smell this bakery for blocks all throughout the city. This is one of the main bakeries in Mexico City. So they have people working 24/7 around the clock, baking bread. And then you would see peddlers would come to this bakery, pick up bread, and then they would go out further out in the city and sell it. And the further away from the bakery you would go, the more expensive the bread becomes. And it's the same bread, they're just buying it and supply and demand, selling it off. So it's quite a lucrative business for some of these families and how they support themselves. And then, of course, you can't go to Mexico or Mexico City without getting some tacos. So we did we went on a couple of taco crawls. This was one of our first on our first day, and I really enjoyed. My favorite is the blue corn tortillas. Again, because I have intolerances to gluten, I didn't have to struggle with finding food to eat. And then in Mexico City, I just love, just like every other major city in the world, there is a Chinatown. This one is only about 1.5 blocks long, but it's still really cool to see that culture is ingrained in all of our Western society. And you can't go to Mexico without seeing some artwork from Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo. So this was one of the Diego Rivera murals in one of the performing arts centers in Mexico City. And it's just absolutely incredible. So from there, we got into some street food and hit up some markets. So up top, we have the tacos de canasta, which are basket tacos, and they are literally like dirt cheap. I think these ones, we got a platter of them for our group. Each taco worked out to about 10 cents Canadian, and they are just to die for. Then you can see the fruit and the produce. It's just so fresh and vibrant compared to what we see even in our grocery stores here once it's been on a truck for a couple of weeks. So we had the torta, which is in the bottom right corner. That's a Mexican street food. It's a pork sandwich. The amount of flavor in this little tiny sandwich was just absolutely stunning. So yeah, it was an attack on the senses, but in the best of ways. So we went to the Mercado San Juan, which is the biggest foodie market in Mexico City. All the top chefs do a lot of their shopping there. So you can get your fresh off the boat seafood for that ceviche, which is the top 2 pictures. I love ceviche, but this was something that I couldn't even describe. They have in this market, I didn't have pictures of it, but they have all the wild game meat. So bear meat, tiger meat, things that we like just completely exotic. And then for those who are really brave, you can have a bite of a scorpion followed by a shot of tequila. But if you're maybe not quite that adventurous, you could stick to the chapulines, which is what the bottom right picture is, and those are roasted grasshoppers.
Oh my goodness.
That's where I tapped out. I did have the roasted grasshoppers, and actually they taste a lot like sunflower seeds, like the spits, because they're roasted with different seasoning and everything else like that. But I could not do the scorpion.
Well, hats off to you for doing the other one. Oh my goodness. I hope that tequila tasted good, because it would have to be.
They don't give you tequila if you're only eating grasshoppers, unfortunately.
Oh my goodness, crazy.
So then to finish up our time in Mexico City, we did what we called the meat mariachi and music night. We had margaritas too, but you have to see a traditional mariachi show. The meat platter at this restaurant, we had everything from goat to sausage and everything in between. And then to have some fun, we went to a local lucha libre show, which is wrestling. We were in there with all the locals who they taught us some colorful language that you have to yell and scream at the wrestlers while they're performing. And we had $2 beers, and it was just a fun night. Not necessarily my cup of tea, but my boys were really thrilled to see my pictures and videos afterwards because they thought it was really cool. So it was just, again, another authentic experience that nobody really thinks to do when they go to Mexico.
Right.
So Mexican food is just steeped full of influence from all the European settlers. So we've got the meat on a spit here. So when a lot of the invaders came over from Spain and France and the Middle East, they all came as just men. And so then the men would pair up and hook up with some of the local ladies, and their recipes would kind of mash together. So on the left-hand side is the shaved meat that they use for the tacos al pastor, which means shepherd. And so it came as an influence from the shepherds. They would bring, or from the Middle East, they would bring their lamb on a spit, and then it's evolved over time to now they use it for making street tacos. And then over on the right hand side, as another example, is the British would bring their beef pasties over, and then the Mexican women they had their own traditional recipes, and this is how the empanadas were born, is the Mexican take off of those handheld beef pastries. So it's just kind of cool to see all these different nuances mixed together. So while Mexico is, we always think of tacos, all of their food is just so heavily influenced by everything else that it's actually been a protected culinary culture by UNESCO as well, because it's so heavily steeped throughout all the world with all their influence. So we left Mexico City and we took basically the Mexican equivalent of a Greyhound was most of our touring through the Highlands. We saw lots of these bright colored churches along the way, which was kind of the highlight because otherwise you were just looking at grass and hillside. But then we ventured off to Puebla, which is the city known in Mexico where they kind of take claim or stake their claim on the mole sauce, which is that on that picture with the plate of rice and chicken, it's that dark, rich sauce that's made with fruits, and it's really steeped. So it's kind of like, it's really hard to explain it. It's super rich. It's like a thick gravy, but full of flavor, fruits and nuts and spices. And it's one of the most ancient recipes. Each region of Mexico has their own mole, but Puebla claims to be the birthplace of the mole. And then we went to this cantina, bar, whatever you want to call it. It's the oldest pub in Puebla, and they are known for their signature drink, which is this raisin liqueur shot with a goat cheese cube and raisins. goat cheese in a sweet liqueur is not my cup of tea, but the shot itself was fantastic. I brought home a bottle for my husband because it literally tastes like you're taking a shot of butter tart. So if you like butter tarts, this is the drink for you. Have a little bit on vanilla ice cream as a treat or something. It's pretty amazing. But yeah, just leave the goat cheese behind. And then Puebla, again, I'm trying to limit the number of pictures, but the Capilla del Rosario is this incredible, incredible chapel inside one of the churches in Puebla. And as you can see here, it's a Baroque style church, and it's floor to ceiling, head to toe ordained in gold leaf, and these depictions of cherubs and saints. Like, I think they seriously have every saint that you could ever imagine is on these walls. So it attracts people from all over the world just as pilgrimages and just to see the ornate interiors of this church. It's absolutely stunning. And you can't go to Puebla without visiting the Calle de Dulce, which means Sweet Street. And it's literally, the whole street is all candy makers and sweets and bakers. They have these camotes, which I brought home. That's the little rolls that are in the bottom there, topped and then sliced up on top. And their candy's made of sweet potato infused with fruit, which is really interesting. The texture was different to get used to, but it's super delicious. And there's like next to no sugar added to them. And then my personal favorite is the tortita de Santa Clara, which are these cookies down in the bottom right corner that are basically like a shortbread cookie, topped with a pepita glaze, which is a pumpkin seed glaze. So something that you never really expect, because pumpkin is not a flavor or pumpkin seed's not a flavor that I think of in baking. But these cookies, if I could have brought home flats of them, I would. The 2 little trays was not enough.
It looks nummy.
And then Puebla is just a super, super colorful town. All the buildings and churches and market and everything is just like, there's colors everywhere. And you can't go to Mexico without getting churros, as far as I'm concerned. They are my favorite treat, even back home. I have the kids make them for me, but having them authentic from a little street vendor in Mexico is definitely the way to do it. So from Puebla, we only got to spend 1 day in Puebla, which was unfortunate, but it also, what made up for it was that we got 3 days in Oaxaca, which was like literally the city that never sleeps. At the crack of dawn, there's firecrackers going off, which apparently is how they celebrate birthdays. They wake the birthday person up by lighting firecrackers in their front yard. Not sure that that's how I would want to wake up, and there's music and dancing and everything happening all the time. These pictures of the girls dancing, this was just a graduation celebration. So it's kind of reminiscent of going to New Orleans, and there's always a parade. They were having parades through the streets every day that we were there for different graduations or birthday parties, everything like that. And they were all decked out in their traditional costumes. Some would have big floral decorations and everything else. It was just really incredible. We got pulled in to dance with them, and it just made the whole experience a lot of fun. And then Oaxaca is also well known for their alebrijes, which are these wood-carved, kind of mystical-looking animals throughout. You see them all over the place. If you've seen the movie Coco, they're in there. But these guys are basically believed to be spirit guides for the Oaxacan people. And so an alebrije is supposed to act as your guide, your protector, and a mischief maker. So their intent is to keep you from danger while also urging you and pushing you towards adventure so that your life is filled with magic every day. So they're really cute. I brought home one for each of my kids and their favorite animals, and I have one, but just kind of a cool little symbol that came and originated in Oaxaca, and you see them throughout Mexico now. So again, we went to the markets in every city that we went to, but this one in Oaxaca was absolutely amazing. I think we spent 3 days. I did all of my shopping there for the kids. This lady in the middle making the baskets, she sat there all day, every day, just hand weaving these baskets. Those little sunglasses cases that are on the ground in front of her were 10 cents. Like 10 cents Canadian, and she's building them by hand. It was just absolutely incredible. So we all brought a whole bunch home, and if I had more room in my suitcase, I definitely would have brought the bigger baskets. But just the people were so lovely, and she would sit there, and if you wanted to learn how, she would show you how she was weaving it with her hands. I am not that coordinated by any means, so definitely just purchased the wear, didn't make any of my own, but the colors, the peppers, everything that you could imagine or picture in Mexican markets, you saw that in this market here in Oaxaca. We had everything in Oaxaca, from the fine dining. So we went to a 5-star restaurant one night. So that was on your far left side, where we had like these passion fruit ceviche. And I don't know what the top little chip with meat was, but it had the most flavor I've ever had in one bite in my entire life. And then Oaxaca is also famous for their cheese. So they have their own signature cheese, which is kind of like, it reminds me of like a mozzarella or one of our string cheeses that you would buy your kids, and they use it in all of their dishes. And then they have what they call 𝘽𝙖𝙩𝙬, which is this big, it's like a tortilla, but it's big and it's super thin and flat. And they prepare it in a number of different ways, from like a quesadilla style, which I had at one restaurant. And then you can have it kind of like a burrito or an open faced taco. And they use it a lot as a replacement for pizza crust. So they do their pizzas on these 𝘽𝙬𝙬s all over the place, which was kind of cool because you don't expect to see Italian flavors on these Mexican bases. And then the seafood, again, the seafood you can't go wrong with. That was in one of the local, like, super hole in the wall, dingy pubs. And I think we paid $4 for that seafood platter, which they had just brought in from Oaxaca, or from Huatulco earlier in the day. So then from there, we did go out to some ruins out in 𝘽𝙚𝙖𝙩𝙚. It's a site that is over 10,000 years old as well. And up in the hills, you could see some of the old paintings and everything still on the rocks that they've preserved, which is absolutely incredible. We did go into the crypt in this ruin. It was really hard to take any pictures because it was dark and dank, and the walls were covered in like moss, but it was super cool to see like all these ancient sites are still there, standing right next to the predominantly Catholic churches that were built on top of the native Zapotec people and Aztec people's sacred grounds. And then we headed over to another market. This market was primarily, I can't remember what they called it, but it was just meat. Like the whole market was just any kind of meat you could possibly imagine. And this little old lady in the middle there just was giving some guy heck because he wasn't stopping to do whatever she was asking him to. And it was just hilarious because then afterwards she was like the sweetest granny and came over and she welcomed all of us and was shaking our hands, but then she goes right back to giving this guy heck. So it just really made the experience a lot of fun. And so we had traditional barbacoa, which is like your barbecued meat. We had mostly goat at this market, which was different. It wasn't bad. It just wasn't my favorite, I guess. But what really stood out was this drink here, which is called 𝘽𝙚𝙖𝙩𝙚. And it's an indigenous recipe. They can trace it back almost to the age of the ruins there. And it is basically just made from corn, cocoa, and different seeds, and then it's fermented with water and poured. So the ladies are sitting there mixing it with their hands, which probably not so much anymore these days, but this is pre-COVID. So they're mixing it with their hands, and then it's just mixed with water, and it kind of tastes like a cold hot chocolate. So it was really interesting to have all these traditional recipes still being used to this day. And I know people are like, okay, so you went to Mexico and you didn't have tequila? Well, no, we didn't, because we weren't in the tequila region, but we did have mezcal. So mezcal is basically very similar to tequila, but it's smokier, it's double distilled, and the mash is made from the center, the piña, which it looks kind of like a pineapple, of the agave plant. So it's not the leaves. They grow these giant agave plants up in the hills, and then they chop all the leaves off and they just want the heart of it, the core. But it was really cool to go in and see the distilling process. The picture in the middle made me think of Willy Wonka with that chocolate river in the original Willy Wonka movie, except for this was a mezcal river. And it was to go in there and smell the smokiness and the agave and watching it flow down in the stream, which is how they distill it, was absolutely incredible. And then we got to go and have a tasting. So they had 5 mezcal liqueurs, which is what's pictured there. And then we tried 6 or 7 different straight up mezcals as well. So this is in the bottom right corner. There is a picture of one of the many agave fields. You can see the rows upon rows of agave up in the hills, but all the agaves are flavored differently based on where the agave is grown. So they have some of the agave plants are grown up in the hills with the marijuana plants, and they taste just like marijuana apparently. And then there's other ones that grow in drier, warmer climates and are a little bit sweeter. So depending on what your preference is for flavors, you have to play with it and figure out where your piñas or your agave hearts need to come from to get the flavor of mezcal that you like. And then we went to Huatulco, which is probably one of the most beautiful places. The picture in the middle there is no filter. That is how crystal clear the water is. So often when we talk to even our clients and talk about going to the Pacific side, the Pacific Ocean is typically a little cooler and the water is not as clear. Well, guess what? This is on the Pacific Ocean, on the Pacific side, and the water makes you think that you are in the Caribbean, which was absolutely stunning. We got to do a private boat ride and go snorkeling off the bays in Huatulco. So Huatulco is made up of 9 different bays. And so our boat driver, he took us to this completely secluded bay. We were the only ones there, and we went snorkeling off there. We got to see some sea turtles and some rays, and off in the distance, the dolphins were splashing and playing, which was super fun. And then we moored up to one of the other bays and went to this super cool little quaint beachside restaurant, and they brought us this plate of freshly shucked oysters, which was delicious.
Okay, I'll believe you in that.
And then to finish up the tour, we kind of came full circle. So we ate our way through Mexico, and then we got to do the cooking ourselves. So Alfredo was our chef, and he came to our hotel and picked us up in this little VW bus, van, whatever you want to call it. And we piled our whole group in there, all 9 of us into his little van. Probably not legal, but it was super fun. And so we made a 5-course meal. He showed us all the techniques and traditional ways. We had a Napole salad, which is made with cactus. And we had fresh grilled fish. We made salsa, we made ceviche, and we even made the tortillas on the grill there. So it was a super fun experience, and a neat way to wrap up our whole tour was by getting to learn the process and the techniques. So I immediately came home from this trip, and I think like 2 weeks later, we went to the Spanish market here in Red Deer, picked up all the ingredients and made our own Spanish or Mexican feast at home. So yeah, it was a whirlwind tour. We did 9 days of literally eating all the way through Mexico. We had to take a break from taco crawls a couple of times because we couldn't possibly eat anymore and reschedule them. But it's definitely an experience that is not like any other in Mexico. It's worth going, and really you can see a beach any other time, but really diving into the heart of it, being with the people and traveling like the locals. The last leg from Oaxaca to Huatulco was a 9-hour bus ride. And I say 9 hours loosely because on Mexican time, I think it probably honestly took us closer to 11 or 12 hours, but it gave us a little bit of a reprieve and a day for our stomachs to settle before we did a lot more eating. So definitely encourage anybody to check it out. Intrepid is the company that I went with, and they do a number of food tours throughout the world. And again, working with local guides who live and breathe their destination and know all the ins and outs. There's nothing that you can go and not experience if you want to. They were super accommodating. We did have one vegan on our tour. So they found her options everywhere we went, even though we were eating a lot of meat. They always found something, and they're super accommodating. So definitely worth trying something different. And I can't rave enough about how much fun it was.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jordana. That was really, really great. Who knew that there was so much to do off the beaten path in Mexico, right? And I think eating and having a few drinks along the way is just an amazing way to really experience the culture and the people. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, Jordana. So anybody that's watching, if you are interested in this, just give our team a call. We can book you up in all sorts of really fun little off the beaten path tours. And until next time, thank you for joining us and have a fabulous day. Bye.